This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. Well, rock and roll is still a new technology.
Right.
Like as far as technologies go, rock and roll is newer than the light bulb.
Right.
So
you never know what side effects it's going to have on people.
Absolutely, you really don't know. We take it for granted, but like the first time you hear rock and roll, I have little children at home. I put on an album here recently, and my beautiful little toddler daughter just starts going like this. Yeah. Back and forth. He starts just rocking back and forth because it's there. It's in that backbeat, and it's in that, At one point later in life, I just said the word backbeat. David was talking about Radiohead, and he's like, "Yeah, Radiohead, you gotta love them, but what are they except Aphex Twin with a backbeat?" Like very interesting. He always stayed on top of new music. Totally.
I remember that I remember buying. I sort of got into David Bowie when Earthlings came out.
Yep.
But I had like listened to some of the older stuff, and then that came out and I listened to it and I was like, holy shit, what? Like, I'm not even sure if I liked it. I was just like, what is he doing? This old man is making like sort of like a dance it was interesting for sure.
Yeah, he had no quit in him at all.
It felt whatever it was, it felt thoroughly modern, like when it came out.
Yeah, he said that he hated wasted days. He hated wasted days. All right, so I got a little bit here now about his first album, which he would release in 1967, just called David Bowie, right? And got a 1-star review in Blender. I mean, oof. Rolling Stone, 2 stars. I mean, just like, and then the reissues, 3 stars. I mean, I'm just
Is it any good? I've never heard this.
I mean, you can hear what he's doing, but I mean, I'll tell you the sides, right? It's Uncle Arthur, Sell Me a Coat, Rubber Band, Love You Till Tuesday, There Is a Happy Land, We Are Hungry Men, When I Live My Dream, Little Bombardier, Silly Boy Blue, Come and Buy Me Toys, Join the Gang, She's Got Medals, Maid of Bond Street, Please Mr. Gravedigger. I mean, I'll read about it.
Yeah.
He did not like The Laughing Gnome after it came out. He was upset that it got released. He wanted to disavow it. Despite David's disdain for The Laughing Gnome, one of the most fascinating elements of the recording is that on it, David's voice is almost an exact voice print of Anthony Newley's. His fascination with Newley was born when, at the impressionable age of 14, he saw him on stage in Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, which Newley wrote and performed. A singer, actor, songwriter, mime, and dancer, Newley was the prototype of the star David longed to become. I was Tony Newley for a year, he once admitted. However, David being David, he flew too close to the flame by aping Newley's voice with such unerring accuracy that, at the time, Newley was said to be genuinely annoyed by his uncanny imitation of him, particularly in June of 1967 when David's first solo album, David Bowie, for which he wrote and sang all 14 tracks, was released, still with a big dollop of Newley about it. This is worth noting, too, like his early stuff, it's this Newley guy, and then you could just clearly tell he's mimicking the Beatles. It's really not until you're a few albums in that you're just like fully David Bowie.
Right.
And that's okay. Right? If you're a young artist, you don't have to start with Ziggy. Right?
No.
You start where you start. And
no, everybody imitates like the stuff that influences them the most, especially early on. I mean, it's almost like part of how a creative life works, I feel like.
Yes. Yeah. And everybody talks about the anxiety of influence. And like, I would rather you pantomime the Beatles and be accused of sounding a little bit like too much like the Beatles and make music than not.
Hmm.
Like,
Right.
if you're
Yeah.
called to make music, do a Beatles cover band. I don't care. Just be creative.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's
Yeah.
creative. And
Hmm.
if your creativity is mimicry, that's totally cool and fine.
Hmm.
Everybody, and
Hmm.
everybody starts there. Um, I was just reading that like I think it's on Master of Puppets. One of the songs on Master of Puppets, there's a riff from Bowie's song Andy Warhol in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it just shows up
Okay.
everywhere. You just go
Okay.
like, okay, all right. So I think Bowie liked that irreverent thing, and his delivery was very similar to mine, that Cockney thing, newly observed long afterwards, then hastily added. But then he went on to become madly elegant and very, very original. 10 days after David's first album was released, he made the monumental decision to move out of his parents' home and into Ken Pitt's book-filled fourth-floor apartment on London's elegant Manchester Square. There, David was to be exposed to one of the seminal musical influences of his career, the Velvet Underground.
Mm,
Household name now, totally obscure then.
yeah.
It all began when Pitt went to America in November of 1966 and returned with a demo of the Velvet Underground's first album and gave it to David, telling him it was hideous, but probably the kind of thing David would like. I adored it, David said. And this is a funny thing, started doing a couple of the songs from the album on stage. So I was actually doing Velvet Underground covers before the album came out.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
yeah, yeah. Uh, by now, Ralph Horton was completely out of the picture, and Ken Pitt was managing David on his own and acting as his cultural mentor as well, although David's knowledge of literature was already well developed. In fact, the first time David walked into Ken's apartment, he headed straight to the bookcase and ran his fingers over the spines of the works of Oscar Wilde and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I don't know how to say that, Exupéry, thus demonstrating that he was already well acquainted with both authors. Oscar Wilde, friend of the pod. Pitt was instantly impressed by his erudition. He was a great lodger, never a problem, except for the joss sticks, Ken put it, doing his best to obscure the truth about the full extent of his relationship with David. I'm going to guess that joss sticks are cigarettes. What?
I've never
I
heard
mean,
the term before. I mean, it sounds like I don't know.
yeah.
Joss
Oh, no, no,
stick.
no. It's incense. You'd burn incense.
Oh, okay, okay,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, now we know. All right, good. So that's funny. The teenage David Bowie walks in knowing Oscar Wilde and he's burning incense and and walking around naked for this guy to
Right,
take in.
right, right, right.
Yeah. Um,
Fun.
so this is let's see. This is a journalist, George Tremlett, observed David and Ken together at the apartment. They probably did have a sexual relationship, but one that was never as important to Bowie as it was to Pitt. I believe Pitt genuinely loved him, but Bowie was always a chancer. And within days of him moving into the apartment, Pitt was left in no doubt that Bowie would happily sleep with women as well. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we've got David Bowie making music and doing his thing. Um, so we're coming up to the breakthrough now. So I think that let's call that Act One. Now we're going to move
Sure.
into Act Two,
I like it.
which is Space Oddity and getting on the charts and everything. We just have a little sipple of water here, Brad. What are you preparing right now? What's your next episode going to be?
Fela Kuti, the
Mm-hmm.
Nigerian uh what would you call him? I don't even know what to call him anymore. After I'm
Impresario.
so deep in this impresario, inventor of Afrobeat, along with the great drummer Tony Allen, political revolutionary, wild man. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be
He had
fun.
a few consorts of his own, didn't he?
He had a few consorts of his own, you might say. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look forward
Cool.
to that. And yeah, if you've never listened to Fela Kuti, I think I'm gonna throw together a little playlist on YouTube. Just click over there and you don't have to go scrolling through to find a good track.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. So David Bowie's first major breakthrough came in 1969 with the release of Space Oddity. The song that tells the story of Major Tom, a fictional astronaut lost in space, was inspired by Kubrick's film 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Sure.
And of course, we've talked about Kubrick, friend of the pod. And I just went on Rare Candy and talked about 2001 over there. If you want to listen to that, they are friends.
Yeah.
Released just days before the Apollo 11 moon landing. talk about timing, right? Talk about
Mm.
getting into the zeitgeist. Space Oddity captured the public's imagination and became a top 5 hit in the UK. The success of the
Hmm.
single marked the beginning of Bowie's rise to fame and established him as a unique voice in the music industry. I'm looking at the Wikipedia right now, and I mean this is one of the most influential singles of all time, and songs
Mhm.
of all time for sure. Um, let's read a little bit. By the end of this is just from the Wikipedia about this. By the end of 1968, Bowie had begun to feel alienation from his career. Knowing Love You Till Tuesday did not have a guaranteed audience and would not feature any new material, Pitt asked Bowie to write something new, a very special piece of material that would dramatically demonstrate David's remarkable inventiveness and would probably be the high spot of the production. With this in mind, Bowie wrote Space Oddity, a tale about a fictional astronaut named Major Tom. The first of Major Tom has his own is like blue link in Wikipedia. That's how you know you made it,
Yeah, the
right?
characters. Yeah.
Your characters have blue links. The first of Bowie's famous characters. Its title and subject matter were influenced by 2001: A Space Odyssey. Bowie said, I went stoned out of my mind to see the movie and it really freaked me out, especially the trip passage. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Biographer
mean,
Marks.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Mark Spitz. I mean, can you imagine
that's
just get ripped on some of that Lil Weed. You
yeah,
just
yeah.
get, you're walking around London,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
go into the movie theater. Oh man, wild.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Every
yeah.
other space movie you've seen has been like Buck Rogers or something,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Right. On like
Yeah.
little tiny screens where you've seen like
Right.
crazy corny,
Yeah.
saucers that with little you can see the string on the saucer. Yeah,
Right.
forget about it. Forget about it. Biographer Mark Spitz stated the song was likely inspired by the scene in which an astronaut communicates with his daughter on her birthday, saying, Tell mama I telephoned before ingesting a stress pill, rather than the film's opening or ending. Fair enough. That scene is filled with a lot of pathos for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, let's see here. He Someone said he and his girlfriend Susie Mercer contributed to the songwriting process and Bowie's breakup. He was going through a breakup with a woman named Farthingale, and we'll talk about this. Deeply affected Bowie. He later said it was Hermione who got me writing for and on a specific person. Uh, Spitz stated Bowie's feelings of loneliness and heartache following the breakup inspired Space Oddity. Yeah, you could hear that. That's maybe a breakup song. Maybe not the
Yeah.
lyrics,
The
but
vibe
the
of it
sort of the
though. Yeah, for
vibe of it is
sure.
a very breakup. Here's
Yeah.
Bowie. The publicity image of a spaceman at work is of an automaton rather than a human being, and my Major Tom is nothing if not a human being. It came from a feeling of sadness about this aspect of the space thing. It has been dehumanized, so I wrote a song farce about it to try and relate science and human emotion. I suppose it's an antidote to space fever, really.
Hmm.
As we know on Art of Darkness, space is fake. Bowie's the original space is fake, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's taking the piss out of
Way ahead of
space
his time.
itself now, way ahead of his
Yeah.
time. All right. It's around this time that David meets Angela Angie Barnett, and
Hmm.
she would become his first wife. And I've got a lot from Angie herself. Um, Let me see how they describe her on Wikipedia.
Why do I get the feeling that you should take what Angie says with a grain of salt?
Yeah, people described Angie as a drama queen. And I mean, no
Okay.
disrespect. I don't know if she's passed on or not. It looks
Hmm.
like she's still around. But I mean,
Oh, okay.
and she's said her piece too. And
Okay.
I'm gonna give her some air here.
That's good. That's
Um,
fair.
yeah, God love her, right? She's partly responsible for Ziggy Stardust. So like she deserves her footprint in history for sure. I mean, this is how she's described. She's known as Angie Bowie, is a Cypriot American model, actress, and journalist. Alongside her ex-husband, David Bowie, she influenced the glam rock culture and fashion of the 70s. She was married to Bowie, whom she assisted in conceptualizing the costumes for the Ziggy Stardust stage show. And they'd go on to have one child here. She was
Hmm.
pretty pretty sophisticated, and she would describe like relatively sophisticated and cosmopolitan, and would describe like the coldness of Bowie's childhood home, just how weird it was.
Hmm.
Nobody would talk, sort of a black and white world, black and white home. And
Hmm. Hmm.
Here's David Bowie coming out of that. But here's what she has to say. I've got something from the Irish Times. I do not want push notifications from the Irish Times. Well, I'll get
Just
to
kidding.
her, but this is this is then and now Angie Bowie, and this is a fellow named Kevin Courtney writing in 2011. John had Yoko, Mick had Bianca, and David Bowie had Angela Barnett, a flame-haired siren who inspired him to develop his Ziggy. Uh, David and Angie were English rock's quirky royal couple, looking and dressing alike in bright red mullets and silk kimonos, and shocking the music world with tales of drugs, cross-dressing threesomes, and bisexual trysts.
Hmm.
Bowie and Barnett met in London in 1969 through a mutual acquaintance, or as Bowie put it, because we were both going out with the same man. Angie's arrival encouraged Bowie to explore his androgynous side, but not everyone in Bowie's entourage took to this loud, domineering American. The couple moved into Haddon Hall, a grand Victorian house in Beckenham, Kent, and established themselves as London's king and queen of tarts, presiding over a heady social scene and living an open marriage. This was the
Ah,
openest marriage. Well, maybe it wasn't the openest marriage of all time,
yeah.
but it was maybe one of the most famous open marriages. Like she
Okay.
eventually, like the deal was, well, as the great Kanye West said, what did he say? Don't fuck no one without telling me. Is that the
Yeah, something
line?
like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Their rule was, don't fuck nobody without telling me.
Yeah.
Their rule was not in front of me unless I'm
Yeah.
in on it. That was their
Okay.
rule. Okay.
Okay.
And yeah, okay. Bowie wrote The Prettiest Star for Angie, and the couple were married in 1970, Angie giving birth to a son a year later. They named him Zoe. And Zoe he's still with us. Bowie's two children are still alive. Zoe is known as filmmaker Duncan Jones. He's
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
a
He made
director of
Moon with Sam Rockwell, which is incredible.
awesome. Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And there's some drama and tragedy here. I mean, they would
Sure.
divorce, and there's some alienation there.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
here's here is a bit about her. She was born Mary Angela Barnett in Cyprus in 1949, the daughter of an ex-U.S. Army colonel. She had a privileged upbringing, attending a posh girls' school in Montreux, Switzerland, from the age of 9, and then going to the U.S. at 16 to attend Connecticut College for Women. When she moved to England to attend Kingston Polytechnic, she found her milieu among the arty avant-garde set in swinging London. She introduced Bowie to many of the strange, eccentric types who would provide the blueprints for his future alter egos. She's been credited with helping to start the glam rock movement.
Mm.
All right, let's see here. Uh, this is her. I first saw David when he played with his band, The Feathers, at the Roundhouse in London. I was a student doing marketing and economics at Kingston Polytechnic and was on the music scene because of my friendship with Lou Reisner, boss of Mercury Records. I already knew he was a dirty dog, sleeping with Hermione Farthingale, his bandmate from The Feathers, and his next door neighbor, Mary Finnegan. And I thought, well, it's going to have to be business for me too, because it's not going to work any other way. But my heart, he was so, so attractive. We moved into Haddon Hall, a grand old Victorian mansion in Beckenham. It felt logical, normal. I made a home. I anchored us as a couple, and I used my sense of theater to help style him, to amplify the brilliant music he was making. The Ziggy Stardust red hair came from looking at back copies of Vogue, the Aladdin Sane makeup, the Space Oddity costumes. We worked on them there together. I was at my parents' house in Cyprus shortly before Christmas 1969 when David phoned to ask me to be his wife. I just opened a
Mm.
letter from him which read, "This is the year we will marry." The next time he called, the day before I was due to fly home to him, he played me the song The Prettiest Star, which he'd written for me. Impressed? I was 19. Of course I was. We married on March 19th, 1970 at Bromley Register Office. The night before, we went out to a friend's flat for dinner, got tipsy, fell into bed, and romped a trois until we passed out. We woke so late we had to rush to the registrar's office, which was sauce for the goose, was sauce for the gander, except I did not flaunt my lovers in the public life we were navigating. I remember Mick Jagger, who was sleeping with my friend, the singer Dana Gillespie, came sniffing around me. David had taken Bianca, Mick's then a wife to the south of France. I wasn't particularly interested in or impressed or interested in Mick Jagger. I had one job, and that was David. We were young and beautiful, and this was London, ground zero for the bold. Free love was just what you did. Threesomes, foursomes, fivesomes. I was never a one-man woman or a one-woman woman either. For David, offers from men and women were abundant to the point of being overwhelming.
Mm.
And there's a I think there's an article here in the Irish Examiner. Bowie and wife almost missed wedding over threesome. Um, so okay, here's a little bit more about it. Um, uh, she said the night before our wedding, it was a mutual friend of ours. We went out for dinner back to her place and had plenty of lively sex. We had a very late night and didn't go to bed until 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. When we woke up late in North London and had to be in Bromley by 10 a.m. to get married. We just about got there in time and staggered in. We saw David's mother, Peggy, and I thought, oh boy, this is not good. She admitted this romp was typical of their life. David was big on threesomes with both men and women, the whole 9 yards, and I was right in there.
Get in there.
Yeah, put me in, coach. Angie revealed the details of their bullshit romance, claiming the rock icon told her he didn't love her when he proposed. She continued, it was a bullshit romance. He had told me before we married he didn't love me, so of course he was not going to be faithful. As it was the 60s, I suppose they call it free love.
Hmm.
Uh the 63-year-old former model also spoke about allegedly walking in on Bowie when he was naked in bed with Mick Jagger. She
Yeah, I've
claimed,
heard about this. Yeah.
I walked into the bedroom and David was there with all these pillows and duvets on top of him, and on the other side of the bed was Mick's leg sticking out. I said, did you guys have a good night? They were so hungover they could hardly speak. I took pity on them. So there's this idea that this marriage may have been one of convenience.
Yeah.
You know, but they made Ziggy Stardust together. So
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, look, uh, that's iconic look, man. That's still like, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Everybody recognizes that.
absolutely. You could go as Ziggy for Halloween this year and every
Hmm.
year.
Hmm.
All right, they married in 1970. She played a crucial role in styling his image. Obviously, their marriage was unconventional, but she really profoundly influenced his gender bending and experimental approach to the music. Um, his third album, The Man Who Sold the World, this really begins to define his unique sound. And it was produced by Tony Visconti. And the Visconti Bowie relationship we could do an entire episode on, but Tony Visconti's a super important lifelong collaborator now with Bowie.
Okay.
Um, this album moves toward harder rock and starts the familiar Bowie themes of paranoia, schizophrenia, and alienation. Um, this is also when guitarist Mick Ronson comes on the scene, whose riffs are key and iconic. Um, they they have their child, Duncan Zoe Jones, in England. Um, I've got a little bit more. I just have, here's my note. DJ 91 sex. And that's how Art of Darkness gets done. And that's just telling me to go to this biography. And okay, and this is uh Cherry Vanilla, one of the Andy Warhol actors.
Mm.
Andy wanted a different feel for London. The girl who played the lead was a trained Broadway actress, and in Andy's mind, he wanted someone more raw. I auditioned for him, which is how I got the part. In London, our apartment was nicknamed Pig Mansion. People were as titillated as they were repulsed and disgusted by us. We went with the strength of a group. We felt like Warhol stars in London. The first time I met David was when I went with Lee Black Childers and Jane County to see him at the country club on the outskirts of London. Lee knew about him because David had apparently done a radio promo tour of America the year before. We introduced ourselves to Angie, who introduced us to David, and we all became friends. We all recognized something in each other. I think he saw the roles we would play for him. It was organic. We started playing our roles for him almost immediately. We weren't servants, but we wanted to tell the world how fabulous he was. Everything was sexual in those days. Time was going fast, and we were going to have a good time. You just wanted to accomplish something and also have as much fun and as much sex as you could. We were all in love with him. We had to be the way we were. He was our mission. We were in love with our discovery and in love with the idea of everyone else falling in love with him. We took on subservient postures, and then we were going out and having sex with him. So, how subservient is that? We just wanted to end up in bed with him at the end of the working day. The sexual attraction was immediate. He was married, but we knew he had an open marriage. At first, I was mostly attracted to Mick Ronson because he was the shy lead guitarist, which is like a groupie dream come true. Blonde, shy, and a musical genius. I just adored Mick. He was straight and apparently not tied up with a girlfriend or a wife, as David was. But I was also attracted to David and Angie, obviously. He was basically a straight man who had no problems with homosexuality. He dabbled a little. I love that description of him. And did some experimentation. But just think what he did for the homosexual boys. That's so giving and beautiful and fearless. The same goes for geek boys who weren't interested in sports. Socially, what he did was incredibly generous. If I had to choose a word to describe him in those early days, it would be focused. He was always incredibly focused, always working. All right, now we get into the spiders from Mars. I just love
always
that.
working, except when he's up till 3 a.m. with,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Fucking.
Yeah.
Thursday, June 3rd, 1971 was the first time the Spiders from Mars actually played together. Mick Ronson had been with Bowie for a while and drummer Woody Woodmansey for a year, with bassist Trevor Bolder being the new recruit. The session took place at the BBC's Paris studios in Regent Street, recording for John Peel's radio show In Concert. When Bolder made a mistake in Song for Bob Dylan, Bowie shouted at him. Suddenly, Ronno, Weird, and Gilly were all on the good ship Ziggy. All right. Trevor Bolder. We were a gang, I suppose, me, Mick, and Woody. But by the time we started in the Spiders, we'd been together for a couple of years, playing together, all from Hull. I've been to Hull. It's in the north east of England. It's in Yorkshire. Pretty sure. Forgive me if I get that wrong. And we'd known each other for years and years since we were kids, really. And I think David was quite lucky to get us as a band, really, in that we slotted quite quickly into being the Spiders, and it worked so well. I don't know if he'd have got that with individual musicians. I think he tried it with individual musicians earlier on, but it didn't work. But we'd been playing together as a band. We were all best friends. I mean, Mick Ronson was the best man at my wedding, and me and Woody were great friends, and I think that's why we were like a gang. Okay, all right. So you get the idea that the Spiders wasn't like a group he put together. They kind of came ready made, and he brought whatever David Bowie, he brought the Bowie thing. So let's see here. I'm jumping around a little bit here because before that would happen, he would put out Hunky Dory. Hunky Dory is crazy. Are you familiar with this record?
I've never listened to Hunky Dory.
Dude, no, but you know all these songs on Hunky Dory, man. I mean, this stuff is like, here's Bowie talking about it. The whole Hunky Dory album reflected my newfound enthusiasm for this new continent that had been opened up to me. That was the first time a real outside situation affected me so 100% that it changed my way of writing and the way I look at things. So it must be influenced by the U.S. So here. This is just from the wiki. Compared to the guitar-driven hard rock sound of the man who sold the world, Bowie opted for a warmer, more melodic, piano-based pop rock and art pop style on Hunky Dory. His lyrical concerns on the record ranged from the compulsive nature of artistic reinvention on Changes to occultism and Nietzschean philosophy on Oh You Pretty Things and Quicksand. Several songs make cultural and literal references. He was also inspired by his U.S. tour to write songs dedicated to three American icons, Andy Warhol, Bob Dylan, and Lou Reed. The song Kooks was dedicated to his newborn son, Duncan. The album's cover artwork, photographed in monochrome and subsequently recolored, features Bowie in a pose inspired by actresses of the Hollywood Golden Age. Yeah, everybody knows this album, even if you don't know this album. Little more here from Bowie. Hunky Dory gave me a fabulous groundswell. I guess it provided me for the first time in my life with an actual audience. I mean, people actually coming up to me and saying, good album, good songs. That hadn't happened to me before. Yeah. And side one is Changes. You know that.
Yeah.
Oh, You Pretty Things. You know that. Life on Mars. You know that.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Is there life, or is that the one? Well, in any case, Life on Mars. Oh yeah, dude, that's a banger. You know that song,
I know that
right?
song. Yeah.
I mean,
the track listing here.
Yeah, this is where we're in it now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta Yeah, crazy. I mean, and then
Yeah.
Kooks, which is a cute song for his son. Quicksand, where I think he's like talking about Nietzsche, it's like explicitly.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, I mean, so at this point, Bowie is Bowie. Yeah, here are the lyrics from Quicksand. Right. I'm closer to the golden dawn, immersed in Crowley's uniform of imagery. I'm living in a silent film portraying Himmler's sacred realm of dream reality. I'm frightened by the total goal, drawing to the ragged hole, and I ain't got the power anymore. No, I ain't got the power anymore. I'm the twisted name in Garbo's eyes, living proof of Churchill's lies. I'm destiny. I'm torn between the light and dark, where others see their targets, divine symmetry. Should I kiss the viper's fang or herald loud the death of man? I'm sinking in the quicksand of my thought, and I ain't got the power anymore. I mean, it
Mhm.
goes on. I'm gonna
That's
read this.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not a prophet or a Stone Age man, just a mortal with the potential of a Superman. I'm living on. I'm tethered to the logic of Homo sapien. Can't take my eyes from the great salvation of bullshit faith. If I don't explain what you ought to know, you can tell me all about it on the next Bardo. I'm sinking in the quicksand of my thought, and I ain't got the power anymore. Right? I mean, it's
Dang.
like this
Okay.
is just like this is, we're way beyond throwaway pop novelty
Right.
songs now,
Right.
right?
Right. Wild.
Um, there's a song on this called Andy Warhol. You know Andy Warhol, that song, right?
Yeah.
Andy
I
Warhol,
think so.
silver
Yeah.
screen, da da da.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Do you? Okay, so all right, here we go. So this is on Hunky Dory, and Bowie, an admirer of Warhol, sent him a copy of Hunky Dory and performed Andy Warhol for him in person at Warhol's
Okay.
studio, The Factory in New York in September of 1971 before the album came out. But due to Warhol's typically minimal reaction, Bowie was never sure if he liked it. Tony Zanetta, who had brought Bowie to the factory and later portrayed yeah, okay. And later portrayed Warhol in Warhol's first play, Pork, maintained that Warhol didn't say anything, but absolutely hated it. Yeah. Yeah, and then he's got a song, song for Bob Dylan. And then I
Okay. Okay.
think Queen Bitch might be the one that's dedicated to Lou Reed.
Oh, okay.
Maybe. Uh yeah. So Queen Bitch on this. And this is oh god, dude. Um the trip inspired him to write tribute songs and the rock band Velvet Underground, more specifically Lou Reed, Queen Bitch. Yeah, exactly. So Queen
All
Bitch
right.
is
All
the
right.
so he's definitely broken out artistically at this point. I
Sure.
love that
Yeah,
bit
sounds
about
like it.
yeah, I love that bit about uh Andy Warhol not liking it and Andy just being sort of Andy. Here's just a little bit about Lou Reed too. Uh and this is something that because Bowie produced Transformer, Lou Reed's solo record, and Reed would
Oh, I did not
claim,
know that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. He produced Lou Reed and Iggy Pop. He saved
I knew
Iggy
about the
Pop's.
Iggy Pop. Yeah, I knew
Yeah,
about the
well, you
Iggy
would
Pop
have to being
relationship. Yeah.
being a Detroiter.
Yeah.
Um, the pair, and this is Bowie and Lou Reed. Pair met in 1971 as Bowie, not a huge star at this point by any stretch of the imagination, was introduced to Reed by Tony Zanetta, a character who would go on to become the manager of Bowie's infamous Diamond Dogs tour. Zanetta had caught Bowie's eye when depicting Andy Warhol in the film Pork. He would also introduce Bowie to Warhol and Iggy Pop during the same week. So this Zanetta makes all these introductions. And he says in an interview, I think, got along pretty well. Lou was the really smart alecky, sarcastic New York guy, but I think he and David were pretty cautious of each other. It was almost like the beginning of a romance. They were kind of sizing each other up. Lou was on his best behavior with David, and then after dinner, we went to Max's Kansas City. The duo famously hit it off and wanted to work together. Bowie, alongside Mick Ronson, would go on to produce the 1972 LP Transformer. The pair would continue as lifelong friends until Lou passed in 2013. Although it wasn't always smooth sailing, uh, I'll come back to that later. Just wanted to get Lou Reed
Okay.
introduced here. All right, so now we're at Ziggy. So he obviously had this artistic genius happening on Hunky Dory. Uh, Go listen to it. It's that album is just it's one banger after another, and the lyrics are
Yeah.
incredible. And he's talking about stuff that like very online people right now are still obsessing over. You know, all the
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who have lots of opinions about Nietzsche but haven't ever read him. You know, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Certainly can't read him in the original German.
Well,
Not like I could either. But you know what I'm saying. You know, he's definitely one of us, one of
yeah.
us. But like
Yeah.
all over the place too. You know, and then
I like that.
now,
Yeah.
yeah, now we pair it with the image,
Hmm.
and that's how you get the big moment. Bowie's transformation into the iconic Ziggy Stardust began in 1972 with the release of The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Ziggy Stardust was a fictional androgynous rock star from outer space, and Bowie's performances as Ziggy became legendary. The album, a concept record, told the story of Ziggy's rise and fall, blending science fiction and uh, rock and roll, obviously. Okay, I'm going back to the very oral biography here to talk a little bit about when this came out. Well, first, the Ziggy haircut was inspired by a magazine photo featuring a model at a photo shoot by Yansai Yamamoto, the designer who would eventually create costumes for Bowie. As Ronson tells it, Bowie was searching intently for something different, an entirely new look. So I think that's super cool.
Hmm.
And they worked on the hair.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like,
You gotta get it right. You gotta get it
you
right.
gotta get it right. Yeah. So this fellow Ronson skillfully parlayed the Ziggy Stardust haircut into a full-time job as the band's hairstylist and wardrobe assistant. It was no accident that the look required constant maintenance, making Ronson an invaluable asset once the album became a runaway success. I knew if I created something that needed touching up every 2 or 3 weeks, I was in. I would go with them on tour. I saw the danger of becoming someone's wife or girlfriend. They got left behind. I wanted to be on the bus, not waving at it. That rocks.
Cool.
Um, yeah, so that's stylist Susie Ronson. She was a 21-year-old hairdresser in the 70s. I just think that's so cool. Um, yeah, right. And that happened because Peggy Jones, one of Ronson's regular customers, um, was in need of a hairstyle. At the request of Bowie's wife, Ronson visited the Bowie's home in Beckenham to have a go at Bowie's locks. That's so cool. I just think it's so cool. Like your hair, the hair is so important. You're going on tour. You're on the bus. It's
Just to keep
I just
track. Someone's got to take care of it. I mean,
I
it's got to
mean
look right.
it's got to look right. I mean,
Yeah.
and they would talk too about how quickly he changed. I think they talk about this on Moon Age Daydream in the documentary about how the fans would always show up with last year's haircut
Oh yeah.
and then be disappointed because they're dressed as Ziggy and now he's doing Aladdin Sane and now you got to catch up
Right.
and get the new
Right.
look and yeah, I
Right.
love
Right.
that.
Right.
Um, Background context. London in 1972 was like the Bakerloo line, all brown and bake light and dark, even when lit.
Mm.
Decimalization, which was meant to hint at the white heat of modernization, had only encouraged Londoners to think that they were all slightly worse off than they'd been before it was introduced the previous year. Decimalization. What does this mean? Does that have something to do with the currency, maybe? Um,
Maybe.
Decimalization meaning. Whoa. Oh, this is important.
Hmm.
Um, Decimal Day in the UK and in Ireland was Monday, the 15th of February, 1971, the day on which each country decimalized its respective £1 currency of pounds, shillings, and pence. Before this date, the British pound
Oh.
sterling was subdivided into 20 shillings each of 12 old pence, a total of 240 pence. With decimalization, the pound kept its old value and name, but the shilling was abolished, and the
Mm.
pound was divided into 100 new pence. The new coins initially featured the word new, but in due course, this was dropped. Each new penny was worth 2.4 old pence. Hmm.
Bring back the shilling.
Yeah, well, we shill all the
This
time.
is shilling. Yeah, this is shilling
Patreon,
erasure.
patreon.com/art of dark pod. We'll shill all the time. Okay, but that I just wanted to make sure we knew that. I did not know
Yeah,
about this.
I
Interesting.
know.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. A gallon of petrol was 35p, a pint of beer 13p, figures that were still new to people. It's almost like money isn't real. A pensioner
Mm.
interviewed on the BBC News couldn't understand why they didn't wait for us old people to die out before changing the currency. That's hilarious. Nothing
Yeah.
changes. A hamburger is $20 now. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
here we are. Yeah. It
20p? Is
wouldn't
that 20p or is that I don't know, who
20
even knows?
20 US dollars for
Yeah.
lunch now.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
it wouldn't be enough to say that every day in London in the early 70s was like Sunday. Specifically, they were like any Sunday in November between the hours of 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was almost as if the country had been brushed with a charcoal wash. On small black and white televisions, in over inked black and white newspapers, in magazines that only sparingly used color, the world was held at a safe monochromatic distance. As the writer Chris Bone pointed out in the New Musical Express when looking back at 1972, psychedelic color had fast faded into uniform blue denim and fledgling heavy metal. Love and peace had come to stand for passiveness and eventual apathy. The spirit of 68 was doused once it was channeled into the conventional left. So the hippies are gone. The hippies got sucked up by the left.
Mm.
And now everything's dreary and workmanlike again.
Mm.
Hmm. Yet if one put his ear to the ground or had his finger on the pulse, he might be able to tell that change was afoot. What makes 1972 special goes beyond folk memories of a glorious summer lived out to the sound of then hip Rod Stewart singing "You Wear It Well," wrote David Lister in The Independent not so long ago. What makes that year special is that it marked a borderline between the 60s, the years of affluence, experiment, sex and drugs, and hippie, idealistic, and yes, flaky politics, and the real 70s, the years of inflation, unemployment, changing attitudes to gender and sexuality, radicalization, and the first mention of words that were much later to become commonplace: terrorism and terror.
Mm. Mm.
This is the world that Ziggy Stardust landed in, beamed down to a sullen, punitive, disgruntled, gray country, a so-called Great Britain that hadn't been great for some time, full of sullen, disgruntled people who by rights shouldn't have taken too kindly to a pipe cleaner thin pop singer dressed up as a gay alien in a quilted jumpsuit. But take to but take to him is exactly what they did. All right. And this is Chris Needs. I'm going to look up who that is to give respect to the person. I always try to do that. I just wanted to paint that picture. He lobbied for Bowie to play Friars Aylesbury in 71. This
Okay.
is just a
Mm.
fan. He
Mm.
came back to play Friars with the proper Ziggy look in January of 72. He'd completely altered his persona, and having told so many people that the new stage show was going to be outrageous, the place was buzzing. Everyone was so excited. I was backstage before the gig and remember Mick Ronson being very unhappy that he was being asked to wear his gold jumpsuit. After a really long wait, the lights went down and we heard Ode to Joy from A Clockwork Orange over the PA. Rocks.
Wow. Okay. All right.
And it
All
was it
right.
was Clockwork Orange must have been banned. It was banned pretty rapidly in the UK, wasn't it? Yeah.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're
Yeah.
talking about some real counterculture shit here.
Yeah.
And a light of strobes filled the hall. Then they all came on and they looked amazing with Bowie wearing these red wrestling boots. The shock of seeing Ziggy Stardust live for the first time remains a major turning point of my life. I've said it many times, but for me, that night kicked off the 70s. In the dressing room afterwards, Bowie just looked at me and shouted, "I told you." When I got home that night, I wrote in my diary, "Met David Bowie again tonight. I can't believe how nice he is."
Mm.
Um, all right. And this is Trevor Boulder, I think the bassist. Let me make sure it's the bassist. I want to get all this stuff right because people are obsessed with David Bowie, and I know if I get stuff
Hmm.
wrong, I'm going to hear about it. Yeah, he's the
Hmm.
bassist for the Spiders. In January, how cool is that too? The band is called the Spiders. The Spiders from
Yeah, I love it.
Mars. Freaking awesome.
Yeah.
In January 1972, we did a run through of the Ziggy Show at the Friars Club in Aylesbury, and it went down an absolute storm. The time we played it before, we'd been doing all the hunky dory stuff and the folk stuff, and it was a folk audience. And when we went back, we thought we were going to get the same people again, but they were different. We all looked at each other, and it was like, Jesus, this is going to work. Um, Yeah, let's see. And this is Harvey Goldsmith, the promoter. I came across Bowie because I read about him. I was running a series of shows at Hemel Hempstead Pavilion, and in January '72, Bowie played the Assembly Rooms in Aylesbury. Having seen him, I booked him to play in Hemel Hempstead that May. Both concerts were extraordinary. He had this manager called Tony DeFries, who had started a management company called Main Men. He came up to Hemel Hempstead, and before David had gone on stage, DeFries gave me a lecture on how David was going to become the single most important artist in the world, the best artist, and this, that, and the other. And I should really get involved with him. Then David Bowie went on stage with a pretty amazing band, the Spiders, and they just nailed it. The audience went nuts. When he came off stage, I remember Tony DeFries just laying into me, telling me once again just how big and how important David was going to be. And he was right. My acid test with artists is always the stage, because the edge of the stage is the defining line between the business and the real world. And if an artist can get across that barrier, the edge of the stage, and the audience connects with them, then you know you've got a winner. All right. Um, damn, there's one bit where he had he went on stage and the sound wasn't playing, like their sound went out, and so he just but he captivated by the crowd by like swishing his hips and telling them what he was wearing somehow until they could get the sound right. He just was at
Yeah.
this point he was relentless. And I love
Mm,
this idea. We got to get back to that psychology from his childhood about like the chilly household and the no cuddles.
mm,
He's not that guy when he's on stage. He's Ziggy Stardust on stage. And in
right.
interviews, he still talks about Ziggy like a third person. He's
Right.
really doing
Right.
this method thing, this like, I am a queer space alien from outer space, and I'm here to rock and roll. All right. A little more here. Um, yeah. On January 22nd of 1972, on the cusp of fame, Bowie told melody makers Michael Watts he was gay and always has been. So I have that in this
Ah,
book over here. So now
nice.
he tells him he's gay,
Yeah.
right? And this is Lee Scrivener, who is, find it, Lee Scrivener. This book is crazy because Lee Scriven masterminded the documentary Starman, and like Martin Scorsese's in this book too.
Nice.
Um, Looking back on it, I like to think that Freddie Beretti being gay encouraged Bowie to make his coming out statement in Melody Maker. It happened to be the at the high of their friendship and closeness, and Freddie was sort of living at Haddon Hall and looking after Zoe. So I think he did it for Freddie. If you've got a very close friend who's homosexual and always felt oppressed, I think you'd have to wear the badge of honor to say something about this in a roundabout way. This is the journalist. And that was a big deal. It's 1972.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, that's, yeah.
Hmm.
Michael Watts, the journalist, I think he did it deliberately. He definitely felt it would be good copy. He was certainly
Of
aware of
course.
the impact it would make. I think he'd had a relationship with a man at some point in his life. I think it was something his manager, Tony DeFries, encouraged. He understood the news value of something like that. I was aware of a changed mood towards gay people, not just in rock, but in culture as a whole. Bowie was very alluring. You couldn't help but feel he had a hell of a lot of magnetism. It was a mixture of film star and rock star appeal. He was so much better looking than other rock stars. We met in his publisher's office in Regent Street. He was dolled up as Ziggy, skin tight pantsuit, big hair, huge red plastic boots, dazzling. Only recently had he stopped wearing a dress, a man's dress, he elaborated. He was slightly flirtatious.
There's just something funny about that statement.
I'm a
Yeah,
man.
it's a
I'm wearing
dress,
a
but it's a
man's.
man's
When I
dress.
wear it, it's a man's dress.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. He was slightly flirtatious and made me uncomfortable with myself. Camp is a row of tents, I wrote. Soon he was coming out to me. I'm gay, he said, and always have been, even when I was Dylan Jones. And this is Ken Pitt. Let me just make sure I get it. Um, there's so many names to keep track of, so you have to forgive me.
Sure.
I mean, it's just like endless. He managed Bowie in the 60s, just before he started to become really successful. Um, he's the guy who gave him the Velvet Underground records.
Hmm.
I wasn't at all happy with the "I'm gay" interview. It wasn't the kind of thing I would have advised him to do. I had been observing what was going on in San Francisco, how gays were creating comfortable housing out of slums, designing clothes, going into business, and flourishing. I could see how the gay scene was changing, and I realized it would happen here eventually. And I knew that if the right kind of artist was to talk about this with great sincerity, it would break down all the barriers. That's why we did the interview with Jeremy, a dreadful magazine. I was horrified by the Michael Watts interview and the fact that it was repeated in the Evening Standard that night. John Lydon, Lydon, a singer. Around Ziggy Stardust, David Bowie was an absolute full-on, I'm a homosexual. That was his image. And it was as challenging to the world as you could ever hope to be at this point. And that was a damn brave statement to make. And yobs, hooligans, basically working class guys really liked him for the bravery, for the front of it. It was taking on the world going, that's what I am, and fuck you. A very, very good thing. So maybe not
Mm.
what you'd expect. Like people, these guys, working class guys, say, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. Um, there's a famous picture. I don't know if I'm going to get to it, but there's a famous picture where he's got, I think Ronson's guitar like in his teeth. It's almost like
Mm.
he's going down on the guitar. It's a very
Uh,
famous image,
mm.
that made the
So-
rounds. Um, this is Paul Reeves, a fashion designer. This is a little bit about Angie. He would not have made it without Angie. In essence, David was actually quite shy and retiring, and it was Angie who was the pushy one. She had the vision. When he suddenly announced he was gay, that was Angie. That was her doing. She styled him. She put him in women's clothes. She was the one who understood androgyny. By this time, I was designing clothes and had a shop in Fulham called the Universal Witness. Both of them used to come in, and that's when they started buying women's clothes for him. I made the big floppy hat that he wore for the hunky dory sessions, the one he wore at Glastonbury. And I remember an electric blue fake fur women's coat that he used to like. They both bought a lot of Oxford bags at the time. Okay, you got it.
yeah.
Um, they were both very good at interpreting the right vibe at the time. The Ziggy hairdo, which everyone thought was amazing, was actually based on a haircut that lots of us were wearing at the time, who henned their hair and brushed it up. But he was a very efficient sponge at absorbing the influence into his own look. Um, Here's his Harvey Goldsmith. Angie was hard work, a flower child gone wrong. Angie was a nutcase, completely wild. She was always a car crash.
She was always a car crash. I
Damn.
love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Nick Kent said Angie Bowie was the original Nancy Spungen, the original courtly love, and her
Mm.
downfall was that she wanted to be a star, but she didn't have the skills. She didn't have any skills. She
Mm.
was too top heavy as a personality. She didn't so much light up a room as detonate it. She had to be
Mm.
the center of attention.
Mm.
Another person, Charles Shar Murray, said Angie was very high energy, very much Hollywood diva in training mode. She had Warhol-y fabulosity. It was thanks to Angie and Tony Zanetti and Lee Childers that the word fabulous, spelled with at least four A's, became NME currency. You had to say it in a bored, monotone voice, a Lou Reed drone.
Mm.
And they go
Mm.
on more about Angie. Here's Cherry Vanilla again. I was a nymphomaniac at the time, and I suppose Bowie was a sex addict. He probably was.
Yeah.
He just had a good time. He may have intellectualized it, but it was really just sex, lots of sex. You have to remember we were living through a sexual revolution. To me, it seemed natural to me to have as much sex as possible. We didn't go to gyms, so dancing and sex were our exercise. You could fuck your fat off. Sex was an act of rebellion at the time. Fuck the church, fuck the establishment. Let's fuck. This is one of Warhol's people. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Here's a little more about his bisexuality. I remember from my reading, there's this funny moment where people talk about how polite he was and how strange this would be, especially to Americans, right? Because we're
Mm. Mm.
crass and rude,
Mm.
and abrupt and demonstrative relative to the English.
Mm.
And someone of Bowie's breeding. Not that he's not like uptight and posh and upper class or anything, but he's definitely like his dad was, went to private school and blah blah blah. He was well read and all this. And
Mm.
even on the street, it's just more polite over there, more courteous. And uh how to say this. He would. There was a story someone told of his magnetism, and they were out at some show one night or some people were dancing, and it seemed to be that this young woman was dancing with some guy. So Bowie came up to the fellow and said, "Excuse me, are you with her?" And the guy was, are you interested in her? And
Hmm.
and the man said no. And then apparently Bowie went right up to the woman and said, "Excuse me, would you like to retire to the toilets with me, to the restroom with me?" And the woman said yes. And
Yeah.
everybody watched them go off to the bathroom, come back 15 minutes later
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
continue to dance, and they're happy as
Right.
a clam. That was Bowie's sexual magnetism and also his just free love. Fuck it all. Let's fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
But also his politeness
it is
in a
courteousness,
way.
and that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
getting consent both
I,
from the
I,
the partner
oh,
partner and
if she would have said no, I'm
no,
sure he would have
he
been
would
like,
have
"Oh, you
absolutely
have a
would have
good
walked
evening."
away and found
Yeah.
another partner.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it just his charisma was just legendary and not just a front.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I just think it's so fun. Cherry Vanilla, she sounds like a hoot. Here's another woman from the time, Wendy Lee. I think this is the one who we have the biography of. Yeah, the biographer. And we have her other book, Wendy. Of course, David was bisexual, but only when he chose to be. He obviously had an affair with Lionel Bart, but only because it was expedient to do so. Bowie was a bit of a whore, bit of a whore
Hmm.
for the
Yeah.
industry.
Hmm.
David went to Lionel for business advice, and I think he was fully prepared to swap sexual favors for financial advice.
Okay. I mean,
All right. Yeah. He was also very influenced by Lionel. If you listen to his wonderful song from Oliver, As Long as He Needs Me, he has this wonderful chord change in it where it goes one way when you're expecting it to go another. Then listen to Life on Mars straight afterwards, and there it is again, the chord change going in the other direction. So I've always wondered how much Lionel Bart had to do with life on Mars, maybe more than we think. David was eager to learn from people, but eager to steal too. His relationship wasn't just an affair, it wasn't just sexual. David went to visit Lionel when he was in hospital after an accident, and they were actually very close. I suspect that Lionel was more than a mentor for David. One of David's talents was he knew who to use. He used his bisexuality. As one acquaintance from the time said, I said he would either be a gigantic star or make a lot of money in the Piccadilly men's loo.
jeez.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, here's one more bit about Angie and their marriage. When Angie married David, I think there was an arrangement whereby they would be free. She got a bit fed up at the end and left him because he was slightly overdoing his freedom. They would divorce in 1980, so I'm getting ahead of things with the divorce. We'll come to it. But he made it clear to her before the marriage, they had a great relationship during the time that Angie, David, and I were together. This is Lindsay Kemp. It was a lot of fun, and of course, she pushed him. She was the power behind the throne. She was the Lady Macbeth. And that's
Hmm.
Lindsay Kemp, the mime
That was
and
the mime guy.
the
Yeah.
mime and Dan, and that's a dude. It's Lindsay Kemp. Let's give Lindsay Kemp his due. Yeah, Lindsay Kemp. Wow. Look up the pictures. British dancer, actor, teacher, mime artist, and choreographer. Lindsay Kemp passed in 2018. Rest in peace. He was probably best known for his
Oh.
1974 flagship production of Flowers, a mime and music show based on Jean Genet's novel Our Lady of the Flowers. Um, so there you
Hmm.
are. So big influence
Okay.
on Bowie. Um, can you guess which Bowie tune is about Jean Genet?
Oh.
You have
Oh
to
gosh,
guess.
I
It's so
oh
easy. It's so
man.
obvious when you think about it.
Um,
Jean
I
Genet.
really.
Think about it. Jean Genie. Jean
Oh,
Genie.
okay.
That's about Jean
Okay.
Genet. It's a pun
That's
on the
about
name of
Jean Genet.
Jean
Okay.
Genet. Yep,
All
yep,
right.
yep.
All right. That makes
All
sense.
right. Okay. All right. So I've got a little more about uh a little bit about the first show. Uh this is Nick Kent again. I saw the first official Spiders from Mars gig in London in February of 72. He had done the infamous interview with Michael Watts saying I'm gay, and he'd cut his
Mhm.
hair. He no longer looked like Veronica Lake. So on Wednesday, that copy of Melody Maker went on the stands, and on the Saturday, he played his first gig in London at Imperial College, and I was there. Just a week before I started writing for the NME. Bowie came on stage with Mick Ronson, Trevor Bolder, and Woody Woodmansey, and they hit the first chord of Hang On to Yourself. And after 4 bars, the PA just stopped. Here's the story. Silence. They're all dressed up to the nines and then nothing, just silence, this terrible silence. All the hype of the week had been this performance at Imperial College, and this was his showcase in London in front of everyone important in the industry. And after 60 seconds on stage, silence. The sound had gone, which is every performer's nightmare. And so Bowie was standing there, and for a split second, you could see panic in his eyes, thinking, what the fuck am I going to do? And what he did was put his guitar down, put his hands on his hips in this really camp way, and proceeded to give us all a rundown of what he was wearing. Okay, boots, Anello and David, trousers, Freddie Beretti. He just did this camp routine. And then after about a minute, the sound came back on. In that minute, Ziggy Stardust's destiny was manifest. If he'd walked off stage, as 90% of performers would have done, sloping off stage in a Spinal Tap way, he would have been over. But Bowie stood there, brazen, and won the audience over. There were a lot of potentially hostile elements in the audience, and he totally won them over. We were all going, okay, you've made us look at you, now impress us. But the show was great, and you could see that this was one step on from Mark Bolan. And that at that moment, there was T-Rex to see in the UK, and Mark Bolan was bigger than Jesus. But people with sophisticated ears could see that Bolan didn't have the talent to carry on. He had had a 2-year stint of golden hits, and those singles were very good, but he did not have the ability to develop. David had spent the 60s developing. He learned all the chords. He'd spent hours, days, weeks, months learning to play. He did the work. Whenever Rick Wakeman talks about Bowie, he talks about this guy who was a total professional. If it was 10 o'clock in the morning and he had a recording session, even if he didn't have a song ready, he was there. He'd go in. He wouldn't sit there and read a newspaper while someone spent 7 hours getting the right drum sound. He'd go in and start work. He'd be at the piano or the guitar and he'd start writing lyrics. And by midday, he'd have a backing track, probably with a bunch of people he'd never worked with before. And by 4 o'clock, he'd have a finished demo. That's how he did it. You don't spend 14 years making an album. You don't spend 4 years making an album. You go in and do it. And he did everything in 2 takes, no messing around.
Nice.
Yeah. 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 And we're gonna see how that comes back even right at the very end. Are you familiar with Black Star, the last album?
Yeah, I've listened to Black Star. Yeah.
Black Star's a fucking banger, dude. Backstar, the story behind Black Star gives me chills. I was getting chills repeatedly last night. I was like, oh man, I'm going in. And I feel a lot of obligation to David Bowie, both as a personal inspiration, but also knowing how important he is to so many people.
Indeed. Yeah.
Here's a bit about the fellatio picture. Let's see. This is the drummer. Bass drum skins had to have the name of the band on them back then. I had a blank one and I said, no, I'm not having that. So I took it off and wrote The Spiders on it. Bowie came in and looked at it for 2 minutes. I thought, well, he's either going to like this or not. And he looked at me, no expression, and then went, okay, what's the first number we're doing? So it passed the audition. It was Ziggy and the Spiders from then on. That's so cool. This is Mick Rock, I think a photographer. Let me just make sure. Mick Rock, yeah, photographer. The fellatio picture is one of the most striking images from the Ziggy period. A few days after the release of Ziggy Stardust, there were 1,000 people, his biggest audience to date, at Oxford Town Hall, and I was shooting the show from the front because I had the access. I wanted a different view, so I went to the side, and that's when it happened. David said he wasn't trying to look as though he was going down on Mick. And if you look at the picture, you can see that he's not actually on his knees. He's chomping on Mick's guitar, but his feet are splayed. He was hugging Mick's buttocks in a cute way, but he only did that because of the way Mick was swinging his guitar around. He said, I was simply trying to bite Mick's guitar. He was playing a passive role to Mick's macho role. The crowd certainly had never seen anything like that before. I remember him rushing off stage afterwards, and he said, Mick, did you get it? Did you get it? And I'm thinking to myself, well, I think I did. I'm not sure. It happened so fast. Everything happened so fast in those days. So the next day I got up really early, processed the film, saw the shot, blew it up, and then brought it in to show David and Tony DeFries, who both loved it. There was proper shock value, like Jimi Hendrix setting light to his guitar or Pete Townsend smashing up his. This had gay overtones as well, which was still quite shocking in 72. The rock industry had never seen anything like it. It was mad. Rock photographers were fairly low down on the rungs at the time, but that picture really set me up. And he knew that. David was a very fast read, and he would pick up on things very quickly and absorb them. Then he would make them his. David was a complex person. There was no doubt about it. Complicated, a true artist. I didn't realize until much later how hard he had worked to get where he was. He had had time to evolve, which is what made him so good. He had time to marinate. All right. Yeah. So fun. Um, and let's see here. This is Boulder talking about being associated with Bowie. Well, you get accused of being the same as Bowie, which was unfair because we weren't. We were just a band going along with his idea of how to be big. I mean, it was a big issue for Mick because Mick, being a blonde guitar player, he was like David's sidekick, I suppose. He got more people thinking he was like David than we got. But it was
Hmm.
a bit of an issue when you came back to Hull, sleepy little Hull, because people get
Right.
jealous, don't they? So you'd come back to your hometown and all the people who were your mates or you thought were your mates turned out to be not your mates because they put you down all the time. We didn't get a lot of it, but you did get that sort of happening just because you were associated with David. When he wanted to describe exactly how he wanted this to look, he took us to see A Clockwork Orange. A lot of people thought it was Star Trek, but it wasn't. It was totally based on the characters in A Clockwork Orange, and we just dressed up.
Huh.
So there you go.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, fun. All right. So that's Ziggy, and and the band. And there we go.
It's
So he
quite a moment.
makes,
That's a
dude,
moment in rock
it's a
history for sure.
big, it's a massive moment in the history of everything, in history,
Hmm.
full stop. And he would go on Top of the Pops, and this is from thisisdig.com, why David Bowie's Top of the Pops Starman performance changed the world. One of the most famous TV broadcasts in history, David Bowie's Top of the Pops performance changed the course of music forever. I'm going to read from this. This is from Jason Draper from July of 2024, a few months ago. Few television broadcasts have been as apocal as David Bowie's 6th of July 72 appearance on Top of the Pops, performing what was then his latest single, Star Man. On the BBC's flagship music show, Bowie not only added rocket fuel to his own career, but he also effectively launched the 70s and inspired a whole host of future icons to pursue their dreams of stardom. In just 3.5 minutes, Bowie changed it all with this appearance. It was an obvious hit single. Starman could have been the song that never was. When Bowie first delivered his album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, to his record label, the company bosses felt that it lacked a single. Heading back into the studio on the 4th of February of 72, Bowie pulled out a new song he'd written, Starman, and recorded it with his band, The Spiders from Mars, who immediately saw its potential. I think Mick and I went out in the car after David played it for the first time, and we were already singing it, having only heard it once. Spiders drummer Woody Woodmansey later told The Quietus it was an obvious hit single. With Bowie's record label also convinced the Ziggy Stardust album was complete, and yet in the weeks immediately following its release as a single, on the 28th of April, Starman flew closer to the ground than anticipated. Speaking for the liner notes to the Ziggy era box set Rock and Roll Star, Anya Wilson, a record plugger who worked Bowie's releases in the early to mid 70s, recalled the efforts Bowie's team had been making to get him media exposure. BBC Radio had become a home of sorts for Bowie throughout the first half of 1972, while a pre-recorded performance of Starman aired on ITV on the 21st of June during an episode of Lift Off with Aisha, as hosted by actress Aisha Haig. But the BBC's Top of the Pops was the coveted booking, the one you wanted, despite
Hmm.
hesitation from the show's producers. David could be very controversial in press interviews, very gender bending, and people were fearful, Wilson explained. But serendipity stepped in and Bowie was called up on short notice. There was a cancellation. They needed an act. And so, yes, they put
Oh.
him on. Man, things are different. On Wednesday,
Hmm.
5th of July, 72, Bowie and the Spiders from Mars entered Studio 8 at BBC Television Centre in White City, London, to record the performance that would change his career forever. Uh, Musicians union regulations stipulated that any Top of the Pops performance had to be mimed to a newly recorded backing track, allowing only four lead vocals to be sung live during the show's taping. To comply, a whole new version of Starman, complete with strings and backing vocals, had to be laid down at Trident Studios on the 29th of June, and with the Spiders from Mars, augmented by pianist Nicky Graham miming beside him. Bowie sang along in the BBC studio, writing himself into rock history as he did. So they're not even playing live, and it must have had something.
Mm.
They couldn't record of the whole band, and there must have been laws around what you could do in this studio or that. All right,
Yeah.
all right. Right from the off, his debut was different. Even the black and white TVs of the era would have registered the Technicolor explosion of his red, blue, and gold quilted jumpsuit, his burnt orange spiky mullet, and his cherry red boots. Flanking him in peroxide dyed hairdos and shiny satin catsuits that shimmered under the studio lights, the Spiders looked every bit the intergalactic infantry to Bowie's otherworldly space invader. But it was Bowie's singular presence that drew the cameras and the eyes of thousands watching when the performance was aired the day after filming. Um, and it goes on, right? And
Mm.
let's see here. Um, Bowie claimed the pop crown for himself as he casually draped an arm around the shoulder of guitarist Mick Ronson during Starman's chorus, his white painted fingernails on full display. Securing his ascent to the throne, he pointed to the camera and out into homes across the UK, as if singling out every individual adolescent watching beside their perplexed, even flatly outraged parents. I had to phone someone, so I picked on you. A generation of transfixed adolescents eagerly received the call. I just
Mm.
couldn't believe how striking he was. Susie Sue, then only 15, said later that ambiguous sexuality was so bold and futuristic that it made the traditional male female role play thing seem so outdated.
Mm.
Um, and here's someone else. Let's see. My mother's intense disapproval made me think, well, there must be something great going on here. Music critic Mick Wall reflected years later. Uh, and for budding songwriter Gary Kemp, who watched Top of the Pops at a friend's council flat, public housing basically, the experience went beyond sexuality to open up a pathway that would ultimately lead him to form new romantic idols, Spandau Ballet. My reality was so far removed from this guy's place, and my journey from that moment on was to get there, Kemp affirmed. And I think the same applies to most of my generation. Um,
Indeed.
Johnny Marr from the Smiths, everybody was watching it,
Right,
and it's
right,
just
right.
like, yeah. And
Well,
here's someone.
that show is huge at that time too. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
that
I mean, and
was
there were
that.
only a few
Yeah,
channels. I think even in the 70s. I mean, it's
yeah,
not like you could tune into 200 different channels. I mean, millions of
yeah.
people would have seen this.
Mhm.
50 years later, The Guardian would declare Bowie's Top of the Pops Starman appearance as the greatest BBC music performance of all time. I mean, crazy. Um, Alex Petritis calling it the most famous 3.5 minutes of music TV in British history, resulting in Bowie successfully recruiting an army of suburban misfits. I love it. After David's Top of the Pops performance, it was like being on a different planet. Everything opened up for him, label staffer Anya Wilson said. Um, yeah. So there you go. Big,
Cool,
big
cool.
moment for David.
Yeah,
And so let's call that maybe the midpoint of what we're doing here. I know we've already
yeah.
gone for what, 3 hours almost?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, coming up on it. It's interesting to see that, moments like that, they feel less, it feels less possible for things like that to happen. Like we don't have anything monocultural like that where everybody's sitting around watching the same thing at the same time. And then if we did, we certainly wouldn't just be like, oh, you know what, oh no, we had somebody drop out, we gotta get somebody, and then they go out and find like some talented person. Like I don't know. It just feels like those kinds of moments are very, very, very difficult to come by in the current sort of media environment.
Well, there's no water cooler talk anymore. There's
Right.
no, in a lot of ways, there's no gossip anymore.
Hmm.
And if somebody does something like that live, it's recorded and you can watch it a million times.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. You
So
watch it the next day on YouTube.
there's no like day after at school, everyone's talking about David Bowie
Right.
the same
Right. Right.
way.
Yeah, and
everything's
then you missed it and you're
diffuse.
like, oh man, I need to see that.
Right. When are
I
they going
gotta,
to show it again? Or I've got to go see
right.
that guy live. Yeah. Like it's just everything's more, it's like we've, the culture has changed from being like a hammer into just being vapor.
Hmm.
Like the
Hmm.
culture is just sort of gaseous and vaporous,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know? This is
Absolutely.
sort of what I think sometimes what people mean when they say nothing happens. Sort
Hmm.
of,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
we just had a there was a I mean, we've been living through major historical moments all summer and it's like nothing has
Yeah.
it somehow feels
Right.
like nothing has happened
It's
somehow.
weird.
It's
It's very
very
weird.
hard, very uncanny. It has a lot to do
Yeah.
with media and the way the media mediates reality for us now.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but
Indeed.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um, Brad, can you give me 60 seconds? I got to stand up and
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Why don't you tell people what we have coming for book club, how they can get Patreon, all the rest of it? Yeah, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Coming up for book club, we have Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, which speaking of gender bending, it's a great science fiction novel. I think people who haven't read it will be impressed by it, and people who have read it, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. So, if you haven't jumped into the book club before, basically we if you're a Patreon subscriber or a Substack subscriber, we'll provide a Zoom link day or probably the day of. And unfortunately, I don't have the date of the book of the Left Hand of Darkness meeting on hand, but it's easy enough to find on Substack and Patreon. And you come hang out in the Zoom room with us. We talk, we chat, we talk about the book. You guys, give us your thoughts. We share our thoughts. It's a good time. And then if you can't make it into the room itself, those recordings are available to you afterwards. It's just one of the many perks you get for being one of our beloved Patreon or Substack subscribers.
Thank you, Brad. Yes,
Yeah.
bookends. It's one of the fun things. You also get core episodes a week early. So
Yep.
I'll be putting this out for patrons and for DOMs and subs, patrons,
Hmm.
Patreon, Substack. You get it a week before the hoi polloi. It's like you got
Hmm.
to see Bowie on top of the pops
That's
right
right. That's
away.
right.
You were
Yeah.
part of that inner circle. Yeah, so we've got we're doing The Left Hand of Darkness on October 19th. And
Ah,
then
good.
for book club, we're doing Dune in December. We have some ideas
Dune.
about book club next year. We sort of think we maybe will do living authors, and we will make it
Might
a
be.
kind of a living book club where
Yeah.
we grab friends of the pod. But then also, Brad, I would love to get two or three if we could get two or three biographers on for book club.
Would be cool. Yeah.
That could be
Yeah.
very cool. I know we want to
Yeah.
include. We're going to include Aaron Gwynn. Aaron Gwynn has
Yeah.
a novella coming out, and
Yeah.
if Dan Baltic can manage to calm himself down enough to release Nutcranker 2, we'd love to have Dan Baltic on. And so
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
any case, yeah, that's just one of the perks
Yeah.
you can get by supporting the pod. And um, you know, we talk about the Patreon and the Substack a lot. I've been going for 3 hours here. If you value what we do, if you appreciate the podcast, we ask your generous, ongoing, continued support. The pod had a pretty good month here just
We
recently.
did. Yeah.
We want to see
Yeah.
that nice, steady growth, and we want to keep the people who are already on board. If you fell off at some point and you want to come back on, totally welcome.
Yeah.
But
Of
it really means
course.
a lot to us. And Brad and I have a vision of taking this to a point where it's sustainable in the long term. And $5 a month is not much. It's like what? It's a coffee now. It's a
Yeah.
tip at lunch now, right? So
Yeah. Right.
just the tip.
Right.
That's what I want you to think about when it's time to support Art of Darkness. Just the tip, right?
Hmm.
So maybe instead of make your own hamburger at home one day
Mm.
and give us just the tip of $5 a month. And that makes all the difference. It actually genuinely
It
does.
does.
And every time
Yeah.
we see one of those, we get really excited. And it's like,
Mhm.
damn, somebody values this enough. This crazy podcast that we started 3, 4 years ago. The back catalog has what, like eight? We have like almost 80 core episodes now that you can go
Something
back and
like that.
enjoy.
Yeah. At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so just think about all
We
the
get
extra
ones. We have
content.
ones I forget about sometimes.
Totally.
Like I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, that's right. I
Yeah, we
spent a
did that,
month of
didn't
my
we?
life dedicated
Yeah,
to
for
figuring that
real.
person out. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, just please
Mhm.
consider supporting the podcast. And, again, $5 a month is not much. And, but it means the world to us. And, and if you listen to the pod and you're in a, financially not able to support us, just tell people about it.
Yeah.
Say, hey, there's this great podcast. They just did an episode on David Bowie. I think you'd like that. You tell 5 people, that spreads the word. That's how these things happen. And we love
Hmm.
all our listeners and really appreciate you all. This project is so endearing to me and such a
Same.
mind fuck all the time
Oh yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
I'll put this down and then I'll move on to the next one. But you know, what a joy it is to sit and live with David Bowie for 2 or 3 weeks and to let it kind of wash over me. So I get to do this. It's really a
for
pleasure.
sure, for
Love doing
sure.
it. All right, so let's see. Well, let's just look at the track listing for Ziggy Stardust. Just for kicks, right?
Hmm.
God, dude, it's so crazy. There's a commemorative plaque
Oh really?
in Eden Street where the cover photo was taken, Ziggy
Okay,
Stardust. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Just so cool. His Nicholas Pegg. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars made Bowie a household name and left a milestone on the highway of popular music, rewriting the terms of the performer's contract with the audience and ushering in a new approach to rock's relationship with artifice and theater that permanently altered the cultural aesthetic of the 20th century. Like, damn, dude. Here's
Mm-hmm.
Bowie discussing the album's packaging in 1933. The idea was to hit a look somewhere between the Malcolm McDowell thing with the one masquerade eyelash and insects. It was the era of Wild Boys by William S. Burroughs. It was a cross between that and Clockwork Orange that really started to put together the shape and the look of what Ziggy and the Spiders were going to become. Everything had to be infinitely symbolic. Everything had to be infinitely symbolic. That dude, you know what I
That's a
mean? He gets
manifesto.
it. He
Yeah,
gets it.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Here's Scott. Ziggy Stardust was never discussed as a concept album from the start. We were recording a bunch of songs. Some of them happened to fit together, some didn't work. It's just crazy. Um,
Yeah.
Ken Scott's the fellow who produced it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's not even a 40-minute album. It's 38 minutes long. I'm just
Yeah.
going through here and seeing if I can
That's a good
find.
length for an album, to be
Oh,
honest.
yeah,
You don't have
yeah,
to be that long, but that's where you see that you're like, oh, interesting. All right.
yeah. It's so
Packed with
crazy.
bangers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just banger after banger. 5 years, Soul Love, Moon Age Daydream, Starman, It Ain't Easy, Lady Stardust, Star, Hang On to Yourself, Ziggy Stardust, Suffragette City, Rock and Roll Suicide.
Mm.
Yep. There you go. Fun. All right. Throughout his life, Bowie was no stranger to controversy. And this is where glam rock kicks off, right? So now
Yeah.
glam rock, he is glam rock.
Mm.
Um, His sexual orientation and relationships with both men and women were often the subject of scrutiny. He did that famous interview. In later years, Bowie described himself as a closet heterosexual.
I love it.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
cool. All right, so I got a few more anecdotes here from the Stardust thing. Um, well, let me see. Yeah, I gotta get this. I gotta get this over because I had to come back to this. I already read from this section, but I skipped over it because I wanted to bring it to you in time. So we know, of course, he was born on Elvis's birthday. Um,
Mm.
right. Let's see. Da da da. Even when David was on the threshold of stardom, Elvis continued to exercise a sway over him to such a degree that, in the face of the king, he would instantly be reduced to the level of fandom. In June 1972, David and his guitarist Mick Ronson took a midday flight from Heathrow to New York, and arrived just in time to catch Elvis headlining Madison Square Garden. Holy crap! Or so they hoped. In fact, they arrived there after the show had begun. As RCA was David's record label at the time, as well as Elvis's, David had been given the best seats for the show, which made it even worse that he and Mick arrived while Elvis was in mid-act. He was in the throes of Proud Mary when David, hobbling on kabuki platform heels, his hair dyed bright red, and in full Ziggy regalia, practically stopped the show. I could see him thinking, "Who the fuck is that? Sit the fuck down." It was really humiliating, but unmissable, David said years later. Although the idea was floated that David worked with Elvis in a production writer capacity, which David had said he would have loved, nothing ever came of it, but he still cherishes a note that Elvis sent him wishing him a good tour. And his imitation of Elvis's Southern drawl is perfect. mimicry being yet another of David's manifold talents. I love that idea of
Mhm.
him like showing up late to an Elvis show, front row tickets. The King is on, and here he shows up with his hair and
Right, right, right. It's
mhm,
looking wild. Yeah.
absolutely wild. So much fun. All right, I love and I like that closet heterosexual thing.
That's hilarious.
All
Yeah.
right, uh so now he's an international star, but the intensity of the character began to take a toll on him. In July of 1973, at the height of Ziggy's fame, Bowie announced the character's retirement during a concert at London's Hammersmith Odeon, shocking fans and marking the end of an era. He started working with Coco, is it Schwab? Yeah, Coco Schwab around this time.
Okay.
Uh, she became his PA, and so here, this is from an article called "A Journal of Musical Things." We're going to move in to talk about a couple of people here, aside from David. And this is an article here, and it says, if you're the kind of David Bowie fan who has devoured all the biographies over the years, you'll have inevitably encountered the name Coco Schwab, Bowie's longtime 43-year personal assistant.
Wow.
Crazy. If Bowie
Yeah.
needed anything, from booking a recording to a studio to weaning himself from cocaine, he called Coco. Um, so yeah, he met her around this time, and here's a little bit from the Telegraph. Um, he because he left her $2 million, and people were
Yeah.
like, "Okay, well, what's going on here?" The news that David Bowie has left $2 million to his PA makes him sound like a very generous boss, but Corrine Coco Schwab was much more than the pop star's secretary. By Bowie's side continuously for 46 years, he described Schwab as his best friend and credited her with saving his life in the '70s when she helped him kick drugs, which we're going to come to. There were some suggestions that she may have been his lover for a time, and she aroused jealousy for her close guard of Bowie, provoking the ire of Angie Bowie. Schwab started working for Bowie in London in 1973 when she answered an advert in the London Evening Standard from Bowie's management company, Main Man, asking for a Girl Friday for a busy office. After working in the office for 6 months, Bowie invited Schwab to become his PA as he toured around America. Um, yeah, so um, very let's see here. Well, a little more here. Schwab increasingly became Bowie's protectorate and guard dog, even towards Bowie's wife, Angie. Tony Visconti said in 1986, Coco kept the irritating people out of his life, and Angie had become one of them. Angie
Mm,
Bowie would later blame Schwab for the breakup. All right. Um, so I just want to
sure.
give her her due. And she comes on the scene right around here. And Bowie did not like to fly. Did you know
Oh,
this?
interesting.
He
No, never
hated
heard that.
flying. So he would
Okay.
when they would tour the United States, he would fly over, as we just saw. I mean, he flew over to
Yeah.
see Elvis, but then when he would get to the States, he would take the car. The rest of the
Hmm.
band would fly, and everybody else
Okay.
he would have to have like Coco or somebody else would have to come with him in like the limo and like
Yeah.
drive him. You know, you play in Detroit, you're playing Chicago, and the next day we're driving. You know,
Right, right, right,
playing
right.
Chicago or you're
Wow.
playing Minneapolis the next day, and we're driving. You know, which it's like
Wow.
that's okay. It's a lot of time in the car,
Yeah.
dude. It's a big
There's a lot.
country.
It is a big country. Yeah, it is a lot of time in the car. But I guess if you're gonna be just having I don't know what his issue was, but if you're gonna be having an anxiety attack the whole time, yeah.
He just had people would say he would just like put his nails into his leg, his thigh, and just
Yeah.
like hold on for dear life. He hated it.
Oh
Brad,
man.
I haven't asked you. I usually do this in the middle of an episode, and just to give myself a break and also
Yeah.
hear more from you. Where are you at with like the young boy grew up the way that he did? He's got this schizophrenic family, schizophrenic brother. Where are you at with David
Mm.
Bowie right now? And then also the
Well,
sex stuff.
yeah, yeah. I mean, none of it's super surprising. The schizophrenia stuff is interesting because I always wonder how much like I always wonder how much is, and this is not an assertion of a theory, but it's a genuine curiosity. How much creativity, like how much creativity comes from schizophrenia turned down a couple notches, right? Like if you crank David Bowie up to, he seems like he's at 11, but if you crank it one more notch, are you just have an insane person? So I just think that's just kind of interesting. Um, And then the sexuality stuff doesn't surprise me. The closeted homosexual is like, or closeted heterosexual, I feel like was the term I was sort of looking for from him because it seems like later in life, I mean, I don't know what happens with him. You're gonna tell me, but he marries what's her name? Imara? No,
Iman,
no.
Iman.
Aman. Yes, yes, sorry. And that seems they're married for years and years and years, and that seems solid. So it's kind of interesting to see that trajectory. But
Mm.
I'm also impressed by, this scrolling the discography, and I'm familiar with a lot of these albums, but I hadn't really placed them all in time. Dude, this Ziggy Stardust comes out, and then it's just like he's just speed running to musical stardom, like album after album after album after album after album.
It,
It's incredible.
everything from Hunky Dory on there for a minute is just like it's masterpiece, masterpiece,
Right.
masterpiece, masterpiece,
And they're
masterpiece,
like
masterpiece. Yeah.
11 months apart, each one of
Yeah.
them or
Just
something. Yeah.
working,
Yeah.
working, working.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also like it's right up until till like through Let's Dance. Then it falls off for a minute and then
Mm.
he comes back.
Mm.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna get into it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
the guy was a worker for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was a genius at rallying talent
Yeah. Yeah.
and and
Well,
sharing
and
ideas.
that's a talent in and of itself, right? This ability to bring people together and get them all
Get
on the same
everybody on the
page.
same
Yeah.
page, and then
Yeah.
accidents happen. Oh, I guess you're the spiders. Okay, well, I'm Ziggy Stardust, and you're the spiders from Mars,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now you have
Cool.
this iconic. And it's just this accident. It didn't have to happen.
Yeah. Well, it also reminds me of it's a little bit cliche, but it is always true, this sort of like merging of like luck and working your ass off, right? It's
Mhm.
just like he whenever every opportunity comes there, um he is locked in. He has like he's he is prepared. And so whenever those situations come up, top of the pops, yeah, I can do top of the pops. Yep, let's do it. Just anything that comes up, he's just able to
Yeah, it's
just
like, yeah, we got to record
do
the
and
backing,
maximize.
a new version. We got to record the backing, and then we got to go on
Yeah,
the BBC. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
crazy.
It's cool.
Here's a little article called from inventionofdesire.com, and this is Bowie and the Beats. And this is right around this time, I believe. So listen to this. Guess who he's going to meet? Who do you think he meets now?
Well,
Bowie
he
and the
meets William
Beats.
S. Burroughs.
He
Yeah,
meets
yeah,
Burroughs. Did I tell you
yeah.
that, or did you just
No, no,
guess?
he
Yeah,
just
you
has
just
to.
had to know.
Doesn't
Has
only
to.
make
Yeah.
sense. Well, Kerouac's dead by this
That
point,
was
so
really good. That was
yeah.
really good, Brad. You nailed it. Yeah. When David Bowie first met William Burroughs, figurehead, and just so everybody knows, I did not cheat at all. Like Brad and I have, there you go. Figurehead of the Beat Generation. It was at Bowie's house where the pair dined on a lunch of fish, avocado, and shrimp. Bowie was dressed in a pair of three-tone NASA jodhpurs. They discussed the inspiration behind Ziggy Stardust, the unreliability of memory, porn films, the politics of sound, and Andy Warhol. They also talked about a montage technique called the cut up, where lines of text from newspapers and magazines or from one's own writings are cut out, mixed up, and randomly rearranged into sentences carrying new meaning. When you cut into the present, Burroughs once said, the future leaks out. It was a literary and visual technique that would revolutionize Bowie's career. It was November 1973, and Bowie and Burroughs had been brought together for what was, in effect, a two-way interview by a journalist from Rolling Stone magazine. In preparation for the meeting, Burroughs had read all of Bowie's lyrics, while Bowie had immersed himself in Burroughs' cult novel from 1964, Nova Express, a book that had used the cut-up technique with pioneering effect. Bowie was at a crossroads in his career. He had killed off his alter ego, Ziggy Stardust, that previous June, when he had sensed that the originality of his vision was being assimilated into the cultural mainstream through glam rock. He was too artistically astute, too culturally savvy, and too mercurial to allow himself to become locked into the standard rock star formula, endlessly repeating himself in a diminishing cycle of self-imitation. The cut up was a technique that offered him a way out. It was a way to transform his method of writing lyrics as well as a new method to understand himself. It was a means of igniting anything that might be in my imagination. Right. So, all right. Tristan Zara's Dada manifesto on feeble and bitter love first introduced the idea of the cut up. Um, It wasn't an intellectual exercise for Bowie. It was a pragmatic technique, a very Western tarot that injected chance and accident into his songwriting process. It freed him from the bind of self-expression. So let's see here. After meeting Burroughs in November of 1973, Bowie began to use the cut up technique in his own work. My thought forms are already fragmented, to say the least, he would later say. I've had to do cut ups on my own writing for some time so that I might be able to put it back into some coherent form again. There was a period in his life when he was personally in danger of fragmenting, and the cut up suited his state of mind as well as his need for artistic growth. In February of 1974, he recorded his next album, Diamond Dogs, and he used the cut up for the medley Sweet Thing Candidate, Sweet Thing, as well as for the title track. The method perfectly suited the dystopian temper of the album, distanced, less pop personal, but jarring, disconnected, and compelling. In the 1974 BBC documentary Cracked Actor, Bowie demonstrates his cut up method on camera, snipping out pages from a journal, looking emaciated. Are those lines of cocaine on the table? They are. But precisely articulate. He mentions both Geisen and Burroughs. He uses their method mostly in his own writings. He says they worked from already printed sources, and as a result, the cut up seems to predict things about the future and tell me a lot about the past. All right.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
there I am about him, like, messing with time,
Yeah,
is
for
a really
sure.
big deal. Brad, what do you know? Do you know anything about the Diamond Dogs album? Is that one you're familiar with?
Not really. No, I know I listened to it at one point, but it's not something I've had in
All right.
regular rotation by any
Okay.
means.
Well, to get the catalog right here, it's the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars, which we could do an entire podcast about. Then it's
Mhm.
Images, which appears to be uh like it's a bunch of like B-sides and like I don't even know what this is. It's like some sort of 1975. It's a compilation album. All right. Then you have his next character, which is
Is
Aladdin
that the?
Sane.
Oh, okay. Right, right, right. Yep.
Yeah. Um, so following on Ziggy Stardust, he would reinvent himself as Aladdin Sane, right? Or Alad Insane, right? Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he described that as Ziggy Goes to America, reflecting his experiences during his first tour of the US. The album, featuring hits like The Gene Genie and Drive In Saturday, showcased a more decadent and chaotic sound with influences ranging from rock to cabaret. And this is just a single song on this album. It's Gene Genie, and it came out as the lead single, co-produced by Ken Scott. Bowie recorded the track with his backing band, the Spiders from Mars. It was inspired by Iggy Pop and American culture, with the title referencing author Jean Genet, and it became one of his most famous tracks, and it peaked at number 2 in the UK.
Hmm.
It started out as an impromptu jam during the Ziggy Stardust tour. It's the first song he composed for Aladdin Sane, recorded in October of 72 in New York and then mixed in Nashville. The song's R&B riff was likely inspired by Jacques Dutronc's La Fille du Père Noël, and its lyrics were influenced by the stylized sleaze of the Velvet Underground. The song's title is a pun on Jean Genet, though Bowie later described it as a smorgasbord of imagined Americano. Um, a music video for it was filmed in San Francisco in October of 72,
Dang. Okay.
featuring Bowie with the Spiders from Mars, posing at the Mars Hotel with Serinda Fox. The song was also performed live on Top of the Pops in 73, with a performance that includes a now famous extended guitar solo by Ronson. And this was a staple. I mean, he would play this, you know, throughout his career. It's a banger.
Hmm.
Gene Genie lives on his back. I mean, come on, you know. And it sort of, it sounds like it's about a male prostitute a little bit.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, loves chimney stacks. I mean, the theory is that he's just talking about cocks. That's his chimney stacks or cocks.
Sure.
You know,
Sure. Why
and there
not?
you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So then after that, I just don't want to skip over. I mean, as we get into the back half of his career, we're gonna miss albums because he was
Sure.
so many albums. But this spree up until uh Scary Monsters. We're gonna cover all of that. And the next album is called Pinups. Um, Devised as a stopgap album to appease his record label. It is a cover album featuring glam
Hmm.
rock and proto punk. So gotta satisfy the record label.
Yeah, it's
Um,
surprising that they would want him to do a cover album.
well, I think it's
You
more like
know?
I think it might be more like you've gotta give them something. I
Ah, I
think it's
see.
probably like you're under contract, or it's like, yo, we got to strike while the iron's hot. We're selling
Right,
records
right,
here. We
right,
need you to give us a record. Well, when do we need you to give us a record? Right before the
right,
holidays, 19 October.
right,
Get this out for Christmas. We're selling albums, David. Come on.
right, 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 right.
That's my, it was
Makes
recorded
sense.
in
Yeah.
France following the Ziggy Stardust tour. The last co-production with Ken Scott. Mick Ronson were on it. The drummer was replaced. Um, Following a surprise announcement at the end of the tour that the Spiders were breaking up, tensions were high during the sessions, which was reflected in the tracks.
Hmm.
The album cover featuring Bowie and 1960s supermodel Twiggy was taken in Paris and originally intended for Vogue magazine. Have you seen the cover of Pinups? It's very
I
strange.
have. I didn't realize that was Twiggy, I guess, but it
Hmm.
is strange. It's weird.
It's very
It looks like it looks like they're wearing masks of their own faces.
yes. And aren't
Yeah.
we all? Aren't we
Yeah.
all?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Um, he had intended his next project to be an adaptation of George Orwell's 1984. He devised a record of cover versions as a stopgap album.
Hmm.
Um, his manager was negotiating for larger royalties. Uh, yeah. So, okay. All right. So there you go. On the final day of the tour in 1973, Bowie unexpectedly announced that this is the last show we'll ever do. Um, Although this was later understood to mean that Bowie was retiring the Ziggy Stardust character, the announcement came as a surprise to the audience, as well as the Spiders from Mars members who were not notified in advance of the speech, Trevor
Whoa.
Bolder and Woody Woodmansey. So he didn't tell the rhythm section.
Yeah, it's
That's a shitty thing to do.
yeah, it's not cool.
No, that's really not cool. They were further aggravated when they found out Mike Garson, who played piano on Aladdin Sane, was being paid a bigger wage than the Spiders, who were being paid the same amount as they were from before Bowie's stardom. So, okay, yeah,
Mm,
not good.
mm,
All right, so Pinups happens, and then the next character is or no, Pinups is after Aladdin Sane. Okay, we
mhm.
got Pinups, Aladdin Sane, Pinups, and then we get into Diamond Dogs. Um, and this is a straight up concept album. Um, and Diamond Dogs is the result of multiple projects Bowie envisaged at the time: a scrapped musical based on Ziggy Stardust, an adaptation of 1984, and an urban apocalyptic scenario based on the writings of William Burroughs. So,
Mm.
it's our guy.
Cool. Yeah,
I mean,
cool.
and
Cool.
that's what Rebel comes off of.
Ah,
Um,
okay, right, right, right. Yep.
you know, and we could spend lots of time on this. Here's Bowie describing the Diamond Dogs. They were all little Johnny Rottens and Sid Viciouses, really. And in my mind, there was no means of transport. So there were these gangs of squeaking, roller skating, vicious hoods with Bowie knives and furs on. And they were all skinny because they hadn't eaten enough. And they all had funny colored hair. In a way, it was a precursor to the punk thing.
Hmm.
So this is, uh, yeah, this is Diamond Dogs. It's a really good record. Like,
Right
um,
on.
yeah, Bowie
Yeah, I'm gonna
supported
have
the
to
album
throw
on
that
the.
one in.
You should throw that one in. Supported the
Yeah.
album on the Diamond Dogs tour, whose first leg was started on June of 1974. Co-designed and constructed by Chris Langart, it featured elaborate set pieces and cost $250,000. Fritz Lang's Metropolis and Robert Wien's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari influenced the tour's design, primarily due to Bowie's interest in German expressionism. All right, so very sort of cinematic and theatrical tour. Received mixed reviews, but this album's a banger. This album like
Mhm.
really rocks. Yeah. Um, and it's around this time that he meets Nina Simone. And
Ah,
here's what Nina Simone had to say about him. Let me just get it out here. Uh, Seems so unlikely, but then when you think about it, it's like, I don't know, it makes perfect sense. Nina
yeah, I
Simone.
can see it.
When we met in New York in July 1974, he said, "The first thing I want you to know is that you're not crazy. Don't let anybody tell you you're crazy because where you're coming from, there are very few of us out there." He looked just like Charlie Chaplin, a clown suit, a big black hat. He told me that he was not a gifted singer and he knew it. He said, "What's wrong with you is you were gifted. You have to play. Your genius overshadows the money, and you don't know what to do to get your money. Whereas I wasn't a genius, but I planned. I wanted to be a rock and roll singer, and I just got the right formula. He had more sense than anybody I've ever known. It's not human. David wasn't from here."
Mm.
And here's a bit of because in the 70s she must have been struggling.
Yeah.
So here's a bit from Far Out magazine. Nina Simone and David Bowie were complex souls. They both faced brutal battles, understood one another's struggles, and were there for each other when they formed an unlikely bond during the 1970s. This is from author Joe Taysom, October 2021. Their paths collided in 1974 in strange circumstances. It was purely accidental, but it felt like fate that it happened when it did. Coincidentally, it was a week after Simone was an audience member with her daughter at Bowie's concert at Madison Square Garden. Then, as luck would have it, they were both in the same members club and a friendship was born. As she was leaving the venue, Bowie invited her to sit down, exchanging phone numbers. That same evening at 3 a.m., he rang her and she opened up about the problems she was fighting. Later recalling, he said, "The first thing I want you to know is you're not crazy," and so forth.
Mm.
Don't let anybody tell you you're crazy because where you're coming from, there are very few of us out there. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's real. That's true.
Yeah.
Simone was later, and somebody on Twitter recently was like, somebody's got to make a upper middle brow play about Nina Simone and David Bowie having long phone conversations, And I was like, oh, maybe, or
Maybe.
maybe not. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Um,
Yeah, no, they
yep,
could. It
yep,
would probably have a draw for sure.
yep. Well, the influence of Bowie impacted Simone on a personal level. He took inspiration from her in equal measure. In 1976, he paid tribute to their friendship by recording a version of Wild is the Wind on
Hmm.
my second favorite Bowie record, which is Station to Station. We're
Okay.
coming up to that period, which is very exciting. And Wild is the Wind is a Nina Simone song, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
or it's a song made famous by Nina Simone, maybe.
I
Because
I feel like I could be wrong. I think she may have written that one,
it
but
actually looks like it was written by Dmitri Tiomkin and Ned
okay.
Washington for a
Oh,
film,
okay. Okay.
and recorded by Johnny Mathis. So whatever.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
the
So,
best known version is Nina Simone and David Bowie.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So okay,
Interesting.
fair
Yeah.
enough. Um, yeah, it was the only track that he didn't pen on the whole album. Um, so and he
Cool.
said that I recorded it as an homage to Nina. Uh, the question is, does he remember recording it? Because we were going to get into the drug period, the heavy, heavy, heavy drug period. All right. Um, I just want to make sure I get everything. Yeah, Simone found Bowie to be the most authentic person she ever crossed
Mm,
paths with.
that's
That's
cool.
great. Okay, very
Cool.
cool. Friend
Yeah.
of the
And
pod,
if
Nina
you're listening,
Simone.
yeah, go back and listen to the Nina Simone episode. Yeah.
Yep, yep, do
Yeah.
it. All right, so in 1975, Bowie was ready for another transformation. He moved to LA, a city he hated. He hated
Ah,
LA. And
many such
he said,
cases.
"I'm moving there because I hate it. I want to understand."
I understand what the
Right.
hell do you people see in this place?
Right. And this is and are you familiar with the anecdotes about this period where he
No,
survived on
on cocaine and
milk
peppers
and
or something.
peppers, cocaine,
Milk
milk
and
and peppers.
peppers.
He was down to 80 pounds. The devil
Oh,
was living in his empty pool in LA,
right. Yeah, yeah,
famously.
yeah.
So this was before he praised Adolf Hitler
See, that's
publicly.
the play. That's the play I want to see. Is the
Ah,
devil,
yeah. Yeah. The devil in
if we're gonna make a play about a
a
slice of
David
Bowie's
Bowie
life,
play.
it's that
What
slice.
you could do, you could do and maybe one day I'll write this play. Maybe one day I will. This would be a fun play to
Hmm.
work on, would be maybe you do 10-minute plays about Bowie from different periods in his life, little vignettes, where you do 7 of them or whatever it is. And one of
Hmm.
them could be David Bowie having a chat with having tea with the devil in his pool in
Hmm.
LA
Hmm.
during this
Yeah,
really pivotal period where he is tooting cocaine,
right.
serious cocaine. All right. All right. So now I'm going to read a little about this. Although Coco did her utmost to try and temper David's drug addiction, it was an uphill struggle. Nonetheless, the Diamond Dogs tour would prove to be a resounding success. Melody Maker's American editor at the time saw the tour and said it was a completely different concept of a rock performance. David didn't acknowledge the audience, and the band was on the side. He didn't introduce any songs, and the whole thing was a theatrical experience.
Hmm.
This is the fellow, the editor, Chris, who on to be an RCA press officer and had social contact with David through the years, developed the highest respect for him during that time, saying of David, he was polite and gracious and good company, and women loved him because of that. He is extremely intelligent, knows his own destiny, and is an immensely talented performer and songwriter. He is very bright. Most rock stars are Philistines. All they care about is rock, but didn't read or go to the theater. But David is very culturally aware. He was all that and more, but at the same time, as he himself has admitted, he also had an addictive personality. And in his cocaine-riddled years, his addictions often meant that he suspended his intelligence and lost grip on one of the most crucial elements of his life, his finances. He was this hugely popular figure and didn't have the cash in the bank to show for it. I think John Lennon gave him some tips, and Mick Jagger may have put in a word because he is a businessman, Charlesworth said. And there's going to be a little bit more about John Lennon here. But I'm going to read it because this is around the period where he does Young Americans, and Young Americans has the John Lennon collaboration. You know which song he did with John Lennon?
No, I don't. I'm
You
not
know the song
aware of this.
Fame? Fame,
Oh yeah,
Fame.
yeah.
That John Lennon's on that. And he and John Lennon wrote
Oh,
that together. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yep. David had met John Lennon when they were introduced in LA at a party thrown by Elizabeth Taylor. Oh my God. Just maybe a fly on the wall.
Mm.
We're alive now, people. We're alive now. Okay. We got to be making stuff happen
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Can't go
Okay.
back.
Can't go back. We're alive
Yeah.
now. We went on to a great relationship over the years, David said of Lennon. Terrific guy, very, very funny. They all said that John was very funny.
Mm.
Back in Manhattan, John called David and asked if he could bring May Pang, with whom he was then having a romantic interlude, and Linda and Paul McCartney over to see David. According to Ava Cherry, who was there, the meeting between David and Linda did not go well. I also don't think she liked David very much, and the feeling was mutual, May Pang said. At that point, David made the unwise move of playing tracks from Young Americans to his guests, not only once but twice, whereupon Paul McCartney asked for another album to be put on instead. I want to make sure I'm getting that right about Young Americans. Let me look up the Wikipedia. Young Americans record. That's a great record too. You familiar with that one?
Yeah, a little bit more so than some of the others. Yeah, for sure. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, poor David. He's hanging out with a couple of Beatles, and he puts his own record on a couple of like two times in a row. Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's probably stoned out of his mind.
I'm
He's probably
sure.
like, all tooted up on coke.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
also like there is kind of a move of like, I don't know, dude. Bowie's sold millions of albums by this point. To like be at a party and put on your own album is a little like there's a certain kind of either anxiety or arrogance about that. But
Yeah, well, and it gets better here, Brad. David ignored Paul McCartney, uh, and started to play Young Americans again.
no, maybe he didn't hear it. Yeah.
I may have been in party situations like this where I'm so like, no way, we're gonna listen to Stairway again.
You
Everybody's
guys
like,
didn't understand it.
no, you didn't
Shut up.
understand.
Yeah.
Stop. They're literally prying the auxiliary cable from your hands, your shaky hands. Yeah, all right. John Lennon intervened and gently asked him to play another album. May Pang diplomatically did what John asked, and David left the room. That same evening, David called John, and the two of them talked for quite a while. Afterward, John confided to May that David had been really hurt when he'd asked him to change the album, but that he had managed to mollify him to such an extent that he and David had become friends. According to Tony Visconti, David's relationship with John developed to such a degree that the three of them often spent a night on the town together. We stayed up with John Lennon until 10:30 a.m. We did mountains of cocaine. It looked like the Matterhorn, obscenely big, and 4 open bottles of cognac. Dude, that sounds like a good fucking time. I can't do that. Those days are behind me. Do I want to do a
Yeah.
mountain of cocaine with Tony
Ooh.
Visconti and like some probably the toppest of the poppermost shelf of
Hmm.
cognac. Do I want to drink 4 bottles of cognac with David Bowie, Tony Visconti, and John Lennon? Yes, I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do I know where that ends?
Yeah. Also,
Yeah, it
yes.
ends the same place. It ends that. Okay. Yeah.